about making real-world assets real. And I will be joined by Slow Ventures general partner, Sam Lessin, and I will be talking to him, so me. I'm Emily, yes. Hey, Sam.
It's cool walk-on music.
Okay, all right, so switching gears here, very different topic. Sam, great to see you, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So title of this is It's Time to Make Real-World Assets Real. Let's just start with what do we even mean by that?
Let's do that.
Yeah, let's clarify our terms. Okay, so real-world assets real. Yeah, why don't you just explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think if you think about the crypto world of assets in the broadest sense, in quotes, right? There's a bunch of made-up assets, or we'll call them digital assets. We'll be kind over the last few years, where people kind of have invented everything from, I don't know. I won't call out names. We'll say a lot of them are NFTs and projects that are kind of theoretically virtual,
fighting words on stage,
virtual goods, right? Theoretically, and then there's the world of good old traditional assets, right? Real estate, for instance, is like a very obvious, very real asset. Equities. There's all sorts of things that are ownership of things that produce cash flow, and people value over the long term, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it's, when I think about what real assets are, I think they're the types of things that, an average person on the street would say, oh yes, that is worth something, right? That is something that I can run a financial model against and understand how to value, things like that.
Okay, so you're implying that the average person on the street doesn't necessarily think that an NFT is worth something.
No, and I'd go a step further, which is an NFT that produces no income, right? That's based on some theoretical, community of the future, et cetera. I understand the narrative of how you might get there someday, right? But I think if we're being honest, if you're comparing that to real estate, there's a pretty wide gulf in it being, something that you could run a discounted cash flow on and come up with a value for.
Okay, well, we'll leave the NFT defense for later, but okay, so making real-world assets real, okay, good definition of what a real-world asset is. So now, as I understand it, your mission is to bring these real-world assets on-chain, right?
Yeah, so look, if you think about the last decade of crypto, right, there's been a few stories that have been pretty consistent, right? One has been obviously the story around things like Bitcoin as a store of value, potentially a medium of exchange, things like that. And then there's been this other story, right, which is not new, which is effectively bringing hard assets on chain. This is not a new phenomenon that people are talking about this. I think the reality is that, through a bunch of technological hype cycles and things we've all experienced and seen, that the importance of that has kind of come in and out of focus a few times now. And we're in a moment, which I think is really a great moment, actually. I think it's a good moment for crypto, where things have calmed down a bunch. And we can kind of go and hopefully actually cash that check, right? And go do the hard work that's necessary, because it is hard and dirty to interact with the real world, to unlock all the value that should come with taking things, and we'll use real estate as the most basic example, tokenizing it in a legally conservative way, making it more liquid, using all the amazing rails of crypto and DeFi to unlock what should be really hard, measurable value from the technology.
Okay, let's just walk back for a second, though, because you use the word story, which I think is a really important word here, because there's a huge story about tokenizing real-world assets, but has it actually happened, right? In a significant way. I mean, you're right. I mean, this is one of the crypto narratives. It's let's tokenize this, let's tokenize that.
Yeah.
But are there any examples of this succeeding at scale?
Sure. I mean, I think so. I'll push back on you. You say story. I'd say at scale is an important question.
Okay.
Right. There's plenty of examples and different templates that people have thrown around for taking real estate and having an NFT that represents it and putting it on chain. Taking art and tokenizing it and putting it on chain. We ran at Slow Ventures. We've come up with a format called an SDAO, which is a very, very simple way using a Delaware LLC to take land. We've done something called the Montana Land DAO, for instance, right? And in a very conservative way, tokenize that and put it on chain. So has it been done? Yes. Has it been done at scale yet? No. And I think that's actually the key thing to unlock right now, which is, these have been all experiments to date. And I think if you want to see, as I think a lot of us do, crypto really hit its full potential, like do what it really can do, especially when it comes to this, what we need is to create a series of kind of key unlocks which allow not just one or two little projects here or there to work, right? Not just stable coins that are backed by US dollars, but actually create that ecosystem and allow it to develop. And I think the key parts of that is origination. Like it needs to be a thing that people can make money doing, right? The legal templates need to be massively simplified and need to be super legally conservative. We can't play these games where someone's like, okay, well, we can bring this real world asset on chain, and it's a 16-hop thing that looks like a murder, board in order to get there. Like that just will never scale, right? And that's what we need to figure out.
Right. So I guess just what are some of the ways in which people have failed at doing this? What goes wrong? Like when, because again, this narrative has been here forever, like we're going to just tokenizing these real world assets. So what happens, what are the actual stumbling blocks that these projects run into when they try to do it at scale?
So I think there's a few things that happen, and they're actually more cultural than technological in a lot of ways. The first cultural thing that happens, with a lot of respect, is that crypto is obviously historically populated by people who are really technologically oriented. They love the technology. They're interested in DeFi trading platforms and building all this, that type of, really cool tech. The reality is the real world's messy. And so when it comes to people say, okay, practically we want to go do this, I think you basically screen out, and a lot of people say, whoa, I'd rather do a pure digital thing, right? And that just takes a lot of the talent and energy that needs to happen to actually go to the hurdle out of the table. I think the other thing that comes down to is there's a lot of hand-wringing about this idea that with crypto, it needs to be retail oriented, right? And again, that's kind of the ethos of crypto, is the idea that anyone can participate in any way, shape, or form. Well, the reality is, at least in the US, when it comes to things like accredited investor status, et cetera, there are just certain rules that are in place that it's not that you can't find some clever argument or way around, or maybe try to. But again, if you want to do this at scale, if you want to do this in a way that's going to actually go from a few examples to billions or even trillions of dollars of assets on chain, it needs to be legally conservative. And I think it grates people sometimes the wrong way. So I think the funny part is I think people have the narrative. You think about who's in the room and working on this stuff. A lot of amazing work is done. DeFi is I always like to say DeFi is like having a Ferrari with no fuel in it, right? It's an incredible platform, right, and technology. But now's the moment, and I think this is a great, actually, historical moment for it to finally happen, to say, okay, we have enough people in the room with enough diverse backgrounds that are willing to do the hard work of interacting with the real world, that understand what it means to build a healthy ecosystem for origination, to make sure that the contracts are templated and simple, that you can kind of string these things together in a way that unlocks the actual value, which is, look, historically it's impossible to trade almost all the world's assets, right? The vast majority of the world's assets are liquid, right? Real.
Like what?
Well, I mean, we can start with I'll keep talking about real estate. We can talk about other stuff if you want, but you cannot put a house on the NASDAQ. What you can do is bundle it up, right, and issue a REIT. But if the history of business is a history of bundling and unbundling, right, the actual value would be able to put a lot of these things. So I could say as an investor, I want to invest in homes that have red bathrooms or things like that. Just historically, it's completely economically inefficient to do. Crypto has the technological ability to unlock those type of things, but it's going to require the hardware to actually do it, and you got to prove value to the whole chain, right? You actually have to prove to people that putting land or timber or IP or any of the things that really are cash flowing real assets on chain not only is doable and reasonably simple to do, but that it's worth it, right? Because when you put it on chain, it's actually worth more. There is the value, that liquidity is actually valuable.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's an important point because I think for a lot of the crypto haters out there, they point to this exact case study and saying okay, this hasn't really happened yet, and it's not, it is a reason for why crypto just doesn't have any fundamental value. So I think you're right that in order to convince more people, you need actual real case studies that work. Now, you're sort of doing that with Montana. You're tokenizing land in Montana, as far as I understand. Now, let's break this down though, for a child to understand. Why tokenize land in Montana? Why not just buy land in Montana? What exactly?
There's only one reason to do it, right? And it all comes down, which is because it's more valuable on chain than off, right? That's it, right? If you think about, should I buy this on Zillow, right, and just hold it normally as real estate as an investment or whatever, or should I tokenize it? The only reason practically to ever go through the extra work of tokenizing it is because you're like, oh my God, because it's more liquid, because I can trade fractions of it versus the entire thing, because I could use it to underwrite loans as collateral in various cases in the ecosystem of crypto, it is literally worth 20% more in crypto than out of crypto, right? Okay. That has to be the fundamental reason to do it. And then, on top of that, there's all sorts of like interesting knock-on effects from there. But I think you have to think about that, and then I think you have to think about every single player in the room. Who's originating, who's managing these units, right? Who's investing in them? And just remember, I mean, if you think about it, crypto is all about alignment of interests, right? And at the end of the day, it's about economics and alignment, right? And you can't do these things just because they're nice or because they're a cool idea. You do that because every single player who has to be involved says, oh my God, I really want to do this because I'm going to make money doing it.
Interesting. Are there other sort of real world assets that you see a lot of potential? I mean, you mentioned real estate, you mentioned land. Yeah. What are some of the other areas that you think?
Well, I just think there's a huge spectrum to them, right? And the reason I harp on real estate is it's just so obvious and so easy to think about. Like everyone understands what it means to own a piece of land. Everyone understands what, we do things like timber, right? Which is basically land plus a cash flow, right? Or, multifamily. Like these are just such practical examples. But you can push it all the way out. Like I would argue, you take IP, right? The Marvel universe, that's a real asset, right? It has real cash flows, it has real cachet, and I think the mistake of the last generation, of the last few years is, again, people had this race car in DeFi, super exciting, combination of a bunch of stimmy, right, and like super low interest rates, and technologists, and again, I'm overgeneralizing, but by and large saying, hey, it's way easier to create new stuff than deal with all the complexity of the real world. Everyone's like, we're just going to create our own new IP that's going to be crypto native, and that's how we're going to get there. I think we should just buy the IP that cash flows, right, and put it on chain.
And so how do you get this cultural change that you're talking about that's needed to make this a reality?
I mean, I think slowly is the answer, right?
That's a good pitch for your company.
There we go. Our firm is named Slow for a reason. This is not an overnight thing. I've talked to plenty of people even today, walking around who are working on different forms of how do you effectively do some version of securitization on chain, right? And so it's not like no one's working on this. It's just, it is a less dopamine hit, quick win approach to these things. Like it's going to take patience, it's going to take evangelism, it's going to take all these steps coming together. And so that's why, again, from our firm's perspective, we're venture capitalists. That's how we get paid, right? And we've been invested in the crypto ecosystem in many ways over the years. We're very bullish in the long term. When we do the Montana land DAO, we're not even doing it to try to make money directly. We're doing it because we want to prove that it's doable. We want to show a template.
Proof of concept, yeah.
We want to, in our world, I would love to be able to open source documents and say, look, here's the YC safe equivalent, right, of how you do this in a way that, your lawyers aren't going to barf all over, right, is conservative, makes sense, and can kind of get the crank turning, so to speak.
Let's talk for a moment about the regulatory component here.
Sure.
And how, because I think also, Slow Ventures is interesting because you're based here in the United States, very US focused. Big theme of consensus and just, I guess, of life in general right now is that, in the crypto community is that the US is a really tough place to do crypto. It's a tough place to be an investor. It's a tough place to be a project. I'm just curious, do you believe that, and how does that affect, some of these ideas in a regulatory way?
So look, I'm kind of we take a very conservative approach from a regulatory perspective, and there's a few kind of priors or things that I think probably some people in this room probably wouldn't like about how we think about some of this stuff. But again, we're conservative and keep it simple. So it's when you think about everything we've done with SDAOs, they're just for accredited investors, right? And you can say, well, that's terrible. That's against the ethos of crypto. But that's kind of the regulatory environment we live in, right? And I just think you kind of embrace that and kind of move forward from there. Will really interesting innovations come out from other parts of the world? Of course, right? If the U.S. over-regulates, or even worse than over-regulating to some degree, has no clarity, right? Will you force more innovation elsewhere? Absolutely. And will that be bad for the U.S.? Yes, right? But again, I think, as Americans and as we approach these things, I don't think anything, I think there's certainly things you cannot do in the U.S. that are intellectually cool. I think when it comes to can you securitize, put on-chain hard assets, get the benefits from a liquidity perspective of all the on-chain technology and what DeFi can do and things like that, there are no fundamental blockers. You just have to be willing to actually, be conservative, do simple things.
Okay, so that's cool. It's a relatively bullish US perspective. So let's just zoom out for a moment, just look at the world of VC, because I think it's just such an interesting moment now for VC, right? I mean, VC's taken quite a beating in the public image because of last year and just the, this kind of impression, whether it's fair enough, that VCs were basically writing a blank check to like FTX and not really asking questions, And,
well, that definitely happened.
Yeah. I mean, I was being polite, but yeah. It seems like kind of happened, but yeah. But I think so. Yeah, like I'm just curious. Like now we're 2023. What are you looking for? Like, okay, someone comes in and they pitch something. What are like the immediate red flags? What attracts you? Has anything changed, or are you just kind of keeping the same thesis as always?
It hasn't affected us that much, is what I would say. We still are very bullish on crypto. We still take a bunch of businesses, invest in a bunch of stuff. We're thematic people, so like again, you can guess what themes we're interested in right now. But we do invest broadly across a lot of different themes at different times. Look, in the end of the day, venture capital is a very specific type of capital. It's capital that's designed for opportunities where a small amount of money, especially seed stage, can help you prove or disprove a thesis, which, if true, right, makes something way more valuable, right? That's always what we guys ask is like, what experiment are you trying to run on the $3 million we're trying to give you? We're not interested in competing with the people who want to write you who are just moving cash, right? And there's a lot of those, right, who basically have raised huge funds. And they're less interested in the can we prove or disprove or whatever. They're more interested in how many dollars can I put to work with a 3 to 5x involved or whatever. So that world has changed a lot. But in our world of like, are there interesting people coming up with really interesting theses where you can prove or disprove something to dramatically increase value? That is still very much there. And I think that's how, you go back to our history of some of our biggest crypto wins, like seeding Solana. Again, it was just like really an interesting thing of like, these are interesting people with an interesting thesis. Can our money make a difference? And if we're right, is it worth a lot, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's tough thing, as you would know, about investing in crypto is that so much of it is like futuristic and like hasn't been proved yet, right? So you have to sort of just, I guess, I don't know, look at the teams and look at the people, but.
Well, that's all of seed investing though, is teams and people and the ideas. Yeah. That's not, I think, a big difference. I mean, I think in some ways, I'd say the good news for us as seed investors is there's a lot of opportunities that we would like 18 months ago, but they were priced in nonsensical ways, right? So from a risk-reward perspective on capital, it's not that they couldn't get funding, it just wouldn't be from us, right? And I think the world is kind of re-rationalized in a way that, I think actually creates more discipline for founders. When someone's willing to write you a $50 or $100 million check, you go full bore, right? And no one asks too many questions, you end up with some bad situations. When people have said, great, what would $3 million buy you in terms of proving or disproving a thesis which unlocks value? I think historically in Silicon Valley, it's a much healthier way to build.
What are some red flags, like for teams or projects, or like that might not be obvious? I mean, there's some really obvious red flags, but like, what are some red flags that some investors might not immediately?
I'm not sure I have any like brilliant, non-obvious ones, but in the end of the day, just if you think about any investor, they're trusting the people, right, more than anything else. And I think understanding those people, their motivations, what they're in it for, is really important. And I think something that can be easy to lose sight of in kind of our world of anonymity, DeFi, distributed teams, right? But it's kind of back to basics from that perspective.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. So we are almost out of time, but quickly, any hope for NFTs, or are you kind of just bearish on it?
No, I want to be really clear. NFTs technology is super cool, right? Super bought into NFTs that have a place in the ecosystem as a technology. I would say that I am probably one of the more bearish people you're going to find on crypto being a place that whole new assets out of thin air get created that don't have cash flows but are somehow valuable.
Okay, well, that's the perfect way to end this session. Thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate it.